Howdy folks, today we want to talk about the Docker containers that we're going to use. We are basically going to use Java with SpringBoot application framework, and we will be using MySQL as our database. So we're going to use Docker Compose, and we're going to need that to compose two different containers together. One container would be using Java and Spring, so it would be serving as a web server. You're going to use MySQL database as another container, and Docker Compose would bring them together. So let's get started. So I just have installed my Docker, and I just tested that my Hello World test did work. So I'm going to go ahead and try to demo the version I have, and I can see all the image using image LSA command. You can see that's the only image I have as hello world, and Docker container LSA would show me all the containers that I have, and at this point the only thing I have is hello world. Alright, we can now switch to IntelliJ IDEA to start our brand new project, and I'm going to choose that to be my Maven project. So I would choose Maven, and I would choose my default installation. As a prerequisite, you can also are going to need Maven to be installed. I can throw a link in the description below for the link that you can use probably to set up your Maven on your computer. So I'm going to use idio.godec as my group ID and Epidemics Web as my artifact ID. I'm going to change my path. I prefer it to be documents. I'm on a brand new installation, so bear with me guys. Okay, and I'll verify my configurations and settings that I'm going to have for this project that look good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. Okay. So we have been, I'm going to enable the auto import here. So we have been greeted with the pom.xml. And I'm going to turn on the presentation mode. I'm going to try. To bring back my project window and Maven window. Tool windows, project, and tool windows, Maven projects. Alright. Now that we have really a bare bones application, it does not really have any jar files, just one that comes with Java 1.8. Eventually we're going to have a ton of those. So keep an eye on the left. You would see that a plethora of jar files will be populated when we determine that we're going to use SpringBoot. And SpringBoot makes it really easy by using a concept of meta dependencies or meta libraries, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, if you're working on a web application, you just have to tell Spring that I want to use your project as parent and that would bring in all the configuration from the parent. And I can also specify that SpringBoot is going to be my dependencies, and that's going to pull over all the jar files that I'm going to need as a dependencies, and doing so manually would be a tedious task. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's start low and slow, and let's add our name for the project. So I'm going to add a tag called name, and I can call it Epidemics, for example. And I can also add description. I can say, for example, as my control web app for CDC. Alright, and now I'm going to add a couple basic properties to set encodings and stuff, and set my Java version to be 1.8 because that's what I'm using. And I'm now gonna, so as of this point, basically pom.xml does not know anything, or our Java application does not know anything about Spring Boot. We need to tell pom.xml that we're gonna go ahead and use Spring Boot. So let's go ahead and do that. So we define parent to be our Spring Framework boot, and I specified that to be Spring Boot starter parent. So that idea, so like I mentioned earlier, it's going to try to pull over all the configurations needed. And so basically, using Spring Boot in your application is a two-step process. We just completed step 1 to set up our application. Now step 2, dependencies, right? So these are my dependencies. I'm gonna say that Spring Boot Starter Web and Spring Boot Starter Web are going to be my dependencies. It's trying to resolve the dependencies as we speak, so it's going to download the jar files and everything. So in a couple of minutes you would see a whole list being populated here. Finally, we need to use a couple of plugins. These plugins would be able to start the Spring Boot applications from command line, or in another plugin we're going to use from Spotify that's going to help us to build our Maven project from our Java code, basically Spring Boot application, and create Docker image directly from it with just one command. Now, basically, Docker image is basically what a virtual hard drive file is to VirtualBox, and Docker container is what the actual VM is to the VirtualBox. So you get the idea. You can have your images, and you can have your your containers, just like how you can have your hard drive files like VHD files in terms of VirtualBox from Oracle, and you can have actual virtual machines inside Oracle that are using those hard drive images. Similarly, you can have your Docker images, and which are being used by Docker containers. In our case, we're going to have 2 of these Docker containers, one running on Java and acting as our web server, and another one would be using MySQL image. All right. Unlike VirtualBox, we don't have to download and set up everything by our hand. We can use something like MySQL as as off-shelf from from Docker. It has a predefined list of some standard images like MySQL. We are going to pull it directly from internet without having to do anything. You would just specify some environment variables like password and all that such, and we will be up and running with it. We're going to see that in a few minutes. So now let's come back to pom.xml, and we're going to go ahead and we are going to specify our build parameters. So I'm saying that I'm going to need 2 plugins. One would be the Spring Framework Boot framework, and that's called Spring Boot Maven plugin, and another would be Docker Maven plugin. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and try to create a target folder in our root folder. So you would see an orange folder being created called target, and basically we want to include a jar file which is project build final name. Project build final name is nothing but our artifact ID, and that is epidemics.-web. So we can expect a jar file in the end called epidemicsweb.jar being created inside my target folder. Alright, we can also specify here the image name for our Docker image, just for fun, I'm going to call it epidemics / my artifact ID. So it's going to be epidemics / epidemics - web. That would be my Docker image name. Everything should go right as expected. Alright, so now as you can see, I have a ton of libraries already imported from Maven. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and now I'm going to go to my src folder, main, Java, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new package. And I'm going to call this package edu.garlic.epidemics, and inside that I'm going to create a new class. I'll call it epidemics application, and to declare that this is a Spring Boot application, I'm going to use something called a decorator. Now, you would have used decorators like deprecated and override in your Java programming. This is a similar kind of decorator that would basically declare that this is the entry point for my Spring Boot application. And because this is nothing but a Java application, we're gonna use main method here as our entry point, and here we're gonna use Spring application dot run. This particular method takes two parameters. One is the class, and the second is the args. So we're gonna use epidemics application.class as our class, and args from the main method. We're gonna carry forward them here. So if in the end, if I have my Java built and I want to run it from command line, I could, in theory, pass in some arguments, and they would also be forwarded to my Spring Boot application. So it all becomes more intuitive that way. All right, now we're gonna start creating a class called controller class. It's nothing. It's basically, at the end of the day, it's a plain old Java object, and we are just going to use a few more decorators to set it up. Sure, I did make a mistake. I meant to create a new package because I preferred to keep my controller separate in a new child namespace, so to speak. And inside that, I'm going to create a new class called home controller. Right? And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use REST controller. That's another decorator we're going to use to specify that this class is a REST controller. The idea here is we're going to use public string hello, the name doesn't really matter, method, so that we want it to return basically our hostname, or I would say server timestamp, our hostname, and the port number being used, right? So the way we're going to do this is we're going to have to do this, and I can explain this real quick. Basically, this is the another decorator that we're going to use environment as the type that is provided by Spring Boot, and we are going to go ahead and try to basically use that for getting the port number. We are going to use unedited REST class to get the hostname, and here we are just simply specifying the date pattern, the date format, and we are using a formatter, and we are getting the current date on the server, and I'm going to print a simple message. Well, because it's a Docker mascot, and I saw Finding Nemo with my 4-year-old niece last week. So, and here I'm going to basically print a simple message. Web server I'm gonna basically print the date. I'm gonna have three line breaks, and I'm gonna have host name in bold. I'm gonna print actually the host name, and in I'm gonna have red colon, and then I'm gonna print my port number. So, savvy? All right. Now I'm gonna have to go ahead and try to see if I can build this. All right. It looks like it's done building. I'm gonna try to run it. When we run our Spring application, we would see a big Spring logo, and in the end, we are looking for two very specific log messages to ensure that our application has actually started. So that's a Spring logo, and because it's a brand new installation, this is the first ever code I'm running on this computer. It might take some time. All right, that's pretty fast actually. So Tom gets started on the port 8080, and it says the application started in 14 seconds, which is pretty cool. Now, this Tomcat started, I don't even have Tomcat on my computer here. But SpringBoot is basically comes with or it ships with an embedded version of Tomcat. Now, this Tomcat would be running where the code is running. So right now I'm running on my local computer. So you would see it's running on my 8080 port, that's my local. But if I was to run the exact same code inside a Docker container, it would basically be running, inside that Docker container, and that port 8080 would not have nothing to do with my computer's local 8080 port until unless I map it. We'll see that in a minute. So let me go ahead and try to launch up my browser, and localhost 8080, and here I see what I was expecting, my message, my web server, and here's my current timestamp, my host name, 880 dev host, and 8080. If I was to go ahead with my, terminal and say hostname, that would match to what I have got here. Alright, so let's go back to my IDE. Let me disconnect and make sure that it really got disconnected. Alright, so now I need to go ahead and try to start Dockerizing this application, right? So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a new directory here. I'm going to call it Docker, and basically I already have specified that here, that my Docker directory is going to be src/docker with uppercase D. So that's what I did. I'm going to go and create a new file. I'm going to call it Docker file. Yeah. Alright, I'm going to install the plugins, but I'm going to not worry about that now. Alright, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have to go ahead. Is I want to say from, and now I need to say I need to use Java. I don't really care about the operating system because I'm using Java, but I do need to say what I need to do, what I need to run this application. So I can say Docker search open JDK. So I saw one application that is OpenJDK. It's an official version, and it has most stars. This is equivalent to hub.docker.com. So if you were to go to you would see OpenJDK, and you would see it's the official version. It's basically the same thing that you're seeing here, and I have tags. Tags is nothing but the version I can specify. If I say latest, it's going to download the latest version. I'm looking for JDK 8, so I'm going to specify 8 here. All right, so let's head back to our IDE. I'm going to say open JDK colon. My tag would be 8 for the version 8, right? And I'm going to say, mount my epidemics-web.jar file as app.jar in the Docker container, just for short and sweet name, nothing to do technically. I can even say epidemics-web. I can just keep the name same as well if I wanted to. But this is just what I chose. You can choose whatever you want to do. Run bash c, and then I can say my command, and actually single quotes, and I can say touch /app.jar. And next I want to say is I'm going to run one command. Now Docker containers would allow you to run just one command. The philosophy here is Docker containers would run one command, and that they would try to run that one command very well. So in the end, what I want to tell Docker is to run Java jar app.jar, because that's my entire application right there in my entire Spring application. That's what Spring does. But because we want to run that after, as an entry point, after the container is up and running, I'm going to have to specify it this way. I'm going to call it entry point. Alright, and now because we have spaces here between these three words, what Docker wants us to do is to use double quotes here like this, and double quote this too, and separate them with comma. Actually knowing why we have to do something would really give you more knowledge rather than simply copying from document and pasting it and trying to figure out why is it working or why is it not working. So SpringBoot also recommends that we use two more arguments to our command. So I'm specifying new random here, and I'm also specifying container. So for Java developers, if you guys are using application.yaml file, you know how you can specify the profiles. So you can have one profile to run your application locally, to use your local database connection, or if you want to host it in a Docker container, you can use a profile called container, and this build would use that profile to build up and use the Docker container, meaning Docker database connection strings, etc., while building your image. All right, we are almost done with this. Now all that we need to do is we need to go ahead and build this, using Maven. So I'm gonna say I want to go to documents, Docker, epidemics web. Here is my code, and I'm gonna say Maven clean install package Docker build, and I'm gonna use -x command to turn on debugging. You don't really have to do that. Even you want even lesser output, you can use the quiet mode. I prefer to use X just in case if something should go wrong. Oh, I don't even have Maven installed here. So let me search for the package. Once it's done, we're gonna have to run the Maven version to make sure that we have Maven actually installed here. Alright, now let's make sure that we have Maven installed. Okay, so this is the version I'm using, 3.3.9. Alright, now I'm going to try to see if I can build the image using Maven plugins. Now that I have Maven installed, you don't really need to use the -x, uppercase X, switch. I just prefer it just in the case if something should go wrong, I would already have some knowledge about what went wrong. Maybe I could fix it. Okay, let me try one or two things. If I have to go back, try to use version 1.0. Okay, I don't have my image here. it says Docker file parse error line 4, unknown instruction entry point. Let's make sure that we are using a valid file here. Oops. Right. And we'll try to save all. And let's try to run the command one more time. So we are basically going to go ahead and try if we can build our Docker image one more time and can see that the Docker image is being visible inside my Docker commands. And here we go. We got success. That was a problem. We basically just got Docker image built. Now it's trying to execute the instructions step by step. So we have specified 4 steps in our Docker file. And it's going to try to execute everything one line by line. As we saw earlier, I didn't have my OpenJDK 8 image locally available, so it tried to look for that image locally, and because it didn't have it, it's basically right now downloading that image from Docker Hub. One thing I would like to point out here is make sure that your Docker file is formatted correctly, and so you don't have to run into the problem I just had. And basically another thing I'd point out is make sure that you spell this file, you name this file exactly as Docker file with uppercase D. You don't really have any other constraints. You may put this file in the root. I just prefer to put it under Docker directory, but that's a personal preference, and you can basically determine, you can let the plugin know based on the path here. This is just one of the convention or configuration things. How you can use git ignore file. It's just one of the things you can follow as a convention, and it basically requires you to configure lesser things. We are using Maven here, but basically you can use Maven or Gradle either way. Here, Maven and Gradle are dependency frameworks in Java, basically. So similar to what NuGet is for .NET, or NPM is for Node, or Power is for the front-end stuff, or Chocolatey for Windows, or apt-get for Ubuntu. You get the general idea. Basically, you write the name of the library, and the tool installs it, taking care of all the dependencies. Gradle and Maven both are equally good, and we are going to use Maven here. Let's open Maven's configuration file, pom.xml. To match up with what we're gonna have in our Docker image. So here you're seeing that that's the image name. Just to reiterate, we're gonna use epidemics as my prefix, and it should be artifact ID. So I'm expecting the image name to be epidemics/epidemics.web for Docker image. Now, it took me just 3 minutes to build that end-to-end, and I didn't really have to do anything. It downloaded that, and including all the network latency and everything included in those 3 minutes. So that's pretty cool. Now I can say Docker images, or I can say Docker image ls all, and I would see the image as expected. It was built 51 seconds ago. That's pretty cool. And now I can say Docker container ls for listing and all. Now I see that I don't really have any other container, so let's go ahead and try to download one more image. So I'm going to create another tab here. And I want to basically download my MySQL container here. I mean MySQL image, I'm sorry. So I'm saying that docker run, that's the command I'm using to run a container for the image that I don't have locally. So I'm saying that run that in a detached mode. Let's actually, we're gonna go and cover what that actually means in a minute. And I'm basically setting up my environment variables here. I'm specifying the port that I want to use. I'm specifying what the name should be of the container and the name of the image that I'm going to have to use. So if I go to, let's say, Docker search MySQL, I would see that MySQL is one of the images that's available. It's official and it has the most stars. So it's one of the, well reputed image. That's why I'm going to go for that. And specifically, I'm going to not specify any version. I could have said latest because I'm okay to get the latest version. But if I don't specify the tag, it by default means I'm going to need a latest version. All right. So it tried to look for, once again, image locally, and it didn't find it. So it's basically pulling it from library MySQL from Docker Hub. And while that's doing that, let's go ahead and see what docker run command is. So let's say docker run --help. --help is one of the very useful commands that I would recommend that you would go through if you want to familiarize yourself with some of the Docker commands that we use day in day out purposes. First command I want to draw your attention to is -i. It's the interactive mode. So let's say you have a Docker container running and you want to send a key combination, let's say Control-C to terminate that container in an interactive mode. If you don't specify this command, no matter how many times you hit Control-C, it's gonna get affected on your local terminal, on your local computer, not on the actual Docker container. So if you do this, it's basically gonna forward your key combinations to Docker container. So let's say you need some kind of input on the terminal, you want to type in username, password, whatever, you can basically use this mode to make it interactive. Next command in line is that basically is used in combination to that is -t, that basically allocates a sudo tty. That means that all the logs or all the messages being printed on that container would also be displayed on your terminal where you are running your container. Next in line is -p. This is a very useful command that you can use to specify your port mapping. So let's say you are already running Tomcat or some kind of other web server on your local computer, hence the 8080 port on your computer is already in use. So you can basically specify that you want to map your local computer's 8081 port, for example, to 8080 port on the Docker container. You can do that, and that would be very easy to run the things side by side. Finally, we want to look for two more things, and that is the detached mode. That's what we just used here, and that would basically run the container in a background mode and print the container ID, which it already did here. So it started the container, it downloaded the container, and it ran the container in a background mode, and it also printed the container ID for us. We also used one more switch. The last thing I want to point out is the -e command. We use that to set up the environment variables. So here's the fresh example I can point out is I specify the MySQL root password and database that I want to use, or the MySQL user and the password that I wanted to use. I also specify the port number because I don't have, it's a brand new setup and machine that I'm using right now here to demo, and so I don't really have MySQL installed and configured, so I already know in advance that port 8080 and 3306 would be empty for me. So I am basically mapping them without changing anything, and I use --name to specify the name of the container I want to use. With that being done, let's say docker container ls a, and now actually let me make it a little bit smaller. So now I'm seeing that I have my another container just created 2 minutes ago. That's pretty cool. It's been up for all these 2 minutes, and it's running on 3306 port on the container, which is mapped to 3306 on my computer. Its name is MySQL, and the image it's using is MySQL. So this is the image, and that's the container. Alright, I can also do the same thing for image. So I can say Docker image LSA, and that would basically show that I have my MySQL repository image, and I am using the latest version of it, OpenJDK, that we downloaded about a few minutes ago. That's using tag that has tag 8 because we specified that in our Docker file. And this is the image that we built locally on our very own computer about 6 minutes ago using the Spotify Docker Maven plugin. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to need to start up this container. We want to start up a new container that is using Epidemic's web image, and it's linked to MySQL. So we want to say, here's my web server, but it sort of depends on my MySQL. There are two ways how I can do it. One way is I can just specify that in a sudo command, and I keep using that cryptic command all the time, or I can use something called Docker Compose, so that I can write it down in a file, and it would be very easy for me to specify the dependencies. For one Docker container to run, I need to have some other containers to be up. So let's say you need a container for your file server, your FTP server, or your print server, whatever. You can specify all of those things as your dependencies, and we would see that in a minute. And you can say that you just need to run one command, one-liner command, a very small command, and it'll all be taken care of automatically for you. All right, so let's go ahead and do that very thing. Now, we want to go ahead and we want to create a new file. Let's call that file dockercompose.yml. And we can basically put this file anywhere we want. I'm going to put that in a root folder or root directory for this project. So I'm going to call it dockercompose.yml. Hit enter, and we are presented with another file. Now, what I want to do here is I'm specifying that I'm going to use a specific version of this file, and those two containers that we talked about are basically called services. I'm calling it a DB service. I'm going to use the MySQL latest version for that. And here are all those environment variables which I mentioned earlier that I used here. Those all are now as a part of my configuration now, so I can use them and change them as I would like. And I'm also mentioning the same thing with ports. So port 3306 is now here. And I'm saying that I also need another container which is going to need to run and to use an image that I just built locally. So this is a perfect example what it demonstrates, that you can use, no matter it's an image that you downloaded and you're using it right off the bat, or did you build that image from scratch yourself. You can use either one of those. And I'm specifying here that it depends on the DB service, and the port number I want to use is 8080. And I'm specifying my environment here, and so I'm saying that my host would be DB, which is here, and I want to use Epidemics as my username and password and database, and it's going to be running on port 3306. All right. So with that being done, all that I have that is left for me to do is to make sure if I have Docker Compose installed. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say if I have Docker Compose -- version. I'm going to try to install it using Docker Compose. So I just used sudo apt get install Docker Compose, and it figured out the dependency for me, and it's downloading it that from the Docker repository for Ubuntu. If you're using Mac or Windows, it should be a part of your Docker engine setup that you're running. So please keep an eye on that. So now, if I run the command again, I see that I have Docker version 1.8, and I can now go ahead and say Docker. So let me do this, ls, list all the files for me. So now I'm seeing my file dockercompose.yml. That's the file it's going to look for. So when I say Docker compose up, it's going to basically start my container inside Docker. So what you're gonna expect is your web server, your Spring server, is gonna come up as at the same time your SQL container would also come up, and you would see the logs for it. Now, if I wanted to run those in a detached mode in the background, I could say -d, and then it all would happen in the behind the scenes. But I want to see it all interactively, so I can stop them, kill them, so I can use the -i and -t as my commands. All right. Okay. Actually, I think I don't really need to use those. It's the default. So it's now trying to bring up the DB, and it had an error. Okay, so it's telling me that port 3306 is already allocated. Do you know why? Because we forgot to stop the container we started for MySQL. So if I do this, I see that I forgot and it's already running. So I need to do docker stop, docker container stop, and I can say MySQL, and it will return just the name of the container, confirming that it has been stopped. So if I do now, it exited 4 seconds ago, which is pretty cool. And now see that it says it's created. That's the container we tried to run with Docker Compose, and this is the container we actually tried originally. So it just got created, but it never started because I forgot to stop that container. Alright, let me do this, where I need to go ahead and delete all the containers I have. So I'm going to just use a command to do so. And now, if I do docker ps, or it's just another way of getting all the containers. So I can say lsa, and I would get the cm output. And now I don't have any Docker container running. I still have all my images. So just like docker ps, you can also use docker images to list all your images. You can also say ls command and say all docker images and docker image lsa, and that a would also show you all the images that you're not using, like these two guys here. And docker ls, docker image ls, would give you an identical output to what docker images would do. Alright, so now we have all our images intact. We don't have any containers. So we're going to go ahead and try, and we are in a directory where we have docker compose.yaml. So we're going to now say docker compose up. That's not how you spell Docker. So it's trying to create the DB and web. This time we had no containers running, so it was successful to at least kickstart them, and we would see in logs if they were successfully being started. Now, one thing you would see that the DB1 and Web1 are two different containers. So Docker is helping me by color coding, the prefixes, so I can identify easily which log is coming from which container. After I, after I have that down, it would be very easy for me to follow what's happening. So it's running both the containers simultaneously, and I'm also seeing the simultaneous, outputs from those two containers. And at this point, this is what I care about. Tom gets started on 8080, and my application has been started. At the same time, my port is open for 3306, and it's ready for connections. That's great. Let's switch over to our localhost 8080, and this time, let me make it bigger. And this time it is coming from a different host. That's not my host. That is coming from the Docker container, and it just happened. Current time, right? And I'm still using the 8080 port, so I can see all that happening. And I'm gonna hit Control-C to basically, if that is interactive, that should go ahead and kill, the containers. So it says gracefully stopping, and press again to force. I'm not in a hurry, so I'll give it its time to get it done. And I have both the containers stopped. Now if I say Docker container ls all, it would tell me that this exited 17 and 14 seconds ago. This is pretty cool. I can also say Docker, if I had issued this in a detach mode, I'm bringing up that container once again. As you can see, I have my control to shell was returned back to me because they are running in the background. I can say Docker container, I would say Docker logs Epidemics Web DB1 and F to follow the logs. So we are a little late, but as the logs will be generated, they would be displayed here live. Alright. Now I'm going to go ahead and kill this, so I don't really have to wait for new logs to be generated. Control-C. I could do the same thing for web, but because no more logs are being generated, we are not seeing them. And I could, of course, have said -F to follow the logs. So the shell has not returned to me, and as the new logs will be generated, they would print out here. And if you need to basically try to get in the shell, you can also do that by going into the container. So basically right now, Docker container ls all, and I know that both of my container had been up for about a minute. I can basically say Docker exec -i-t Docker my container name, Docker container name. I would say I want to go in the web container, and I would say I want to get in the bash. So I'm executing the bash command inside the shell. So I'm now at my root here, and now if I would say hostname, that's what it is. So this guy 86 blah blah 85, 86 blah blah 85. It's the same thing as my container ID. And let me show you one more thing. That's what you have here as your container ID, which basically proves that this web app is not coming from a local computer, but it actually is coming from the port I mapped to a container called Epidemics Web 1. And as you can see, just one command is bringing up both the containers at the same time. Docker compose up D. Now, how do I kill these two containers or make them stop? So it's similar to what we did in up. Now we want to bring them down. I'm going to use Docker compose down. It's going to basically stop the containers, and we are done. All right, now Docker container ls a, nothing. It basically brought them down. It stopped the containers, and it removed the the containers and the network it created for them to communicate. All right, guys, that's all for now. See you guys later.